We will travel to your location if you need us to help you with FAFSA nights or to give presentations, do college access presentations, whatever you wish. I will tell you that October is booked very, very solid. And so it probably wouldn't be until November or December before one of us could get out to your school. But I just wanted to tell you that at the very beginning. What we're here for today is to go through an update on all the FAFSA things that have been happening and to show you some of the most important screens in the FAFSA application. And if anybody has any questions during the presentation, you're welcome to use the chat, or there will be some time for questions at the end as well. So I will get us started, and it's great to see that there are so many people here today. Thank you for being here. The name of our outreach program is You Can Go To, and we have other initiatives here at OCAP that are in full swing right now. Startwithfafsa.org is still with us. Everything is going to be eventually housed on the ocap.org website or okcollegestart.org website, but you can always key in our main names. You can go to .org, startwithfafsa.org, and you can find us. It'll take you right there. We're all part of the Oklahoma College Assistance Program, which is a division of the Oklahoma State Regents for Higher Education. All right, we're going to go into a brief introduction about what financial aid is all about. I know that most of you are going to know all this already, but it's just a review for those who possibly are new to the game. And so we'll be very brief with this part. Basically, you can divide financial aid into four major categories: grants, scholarships, work study, and student loans. The grants and scholarships are what we call free money. They are gift aid that doesn't usually need to be paid back. Work study program is that where the student is earning money during college if their college participates in a work study program. Not all of them do, but that is earned money then that they can use to pay their expenses during the college year. That is a need-based program, and so there are students who wouldn't qualify for work study because of their financial need being low enough that they wouldn't qualify. And then student loans, we always say last but not least, student loans. And our suggestion is always to students not to borrow student loans unless they absolutely have to. If they do have to, they need to look at these other three sources of aid and see what would be left to meet those expenses after they have used the funds that are coming from the other places. FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. To do the FAFSA, students will go to fafsa.gov. That's the most direct approach, but I'm going to show you another website here in a second called studentaid.gov. That is where they'll need to go first to open their new accounts in order to do their FAFSA online. All that FAFSA is just a snapshot of that family's financial situation. It's no commitment to any loans. It's nothing like that. It simply shows the financial aid offices the financial need of that family. And it will help that student determine their eligibility for federal and state aid. You may have heard of the OTAG grant from Oklahoma. Those people who do that grant must see the data from the FAFSA to determine if that student is eligible for OTAG. Here is the screenshot of FAFSA.gov where it actually opened a little bit early this year. It's been open for a few days now, which was a surprise to us, but it was a pleasant surprise. So you should be able to find the form right away. Remember that the students will be doing the 26-27 FAFSA, which can be a little confusing because that's not their academic year right now, but they are actually applying for aid almost a year before they're scheduled to go to start that college. Basically, we just want to run through kind of what the whole process looks like. First of all, a student needs to create a studentaid.gov account, and also any contributor, which is usually a parent, will also need to open their own account at studentaid.gov, and I'll explain why this is necessary here in just a minute. Up until this time, this year, it was taking a while for those student.gov accounts to be matched with the Social Security Administration. But they are telling us that this year, students and parents should be able to create those new accounts just before they do their FAFSA. We're going to have some heavy traffic on at studentaid.gov while all this is going on at the beginning of October. And so the skeptic in me says it probably wouldn't hurt to go ahead and create those accounts at least a couple hours before you start your FAFSA, just to avoid any traffic jams. Um, Remember, they'll complete their FAFSA at FAFSA.gov. And then after the student completes their section and they they've already signed it by logging in with their student username and password, then they'll send an email to the parent or another contributor asking them to contribute their information to the FAFSA. The parent then will get that email. And this is another exciting thing to tell you. Um, all the student needs now to enter when they're doing that invitation is to know that parent's email address. And that's it. They don't have to have a social security number or blood type or anything like that. They just need an email address. And I've been told that as long as it's a valid email address, it doesn't even have to match the one that the parent might have used when they created their account. So we're really looking forward to a much smoother year this year. Last year, there were approximately 1 million students nationwide that stopped their FAFSA right here when it was time to invite the parent because it was a pretty arduous process. And we're very glad that that's better now. Okay, after they submit their account, their information, first the students and then the parent will likely be the one that gets the message that the FAFSA is complete, and they'll get a congratulations message. Then we still need to wait possibly 2 or 3 days for that FAFSA submission summary to go to the student. They'll get directions on where to go to open that up. And it will confirm that summary that they received confirms that they did completely process that FAFSA. Okay, do we have any questions in the chat yet?
No, not yet. We're mostly just sharing links for that request survey, and I've gotten it right finally, I think.
Okay, thanks, Robbie. All righty, now we're going to talk about how to open those student aid accounts and what they're for. Basically, that account is going to serve as the student's electronic signature and the parents, if there's a parent on the FAFSA. And so they create their own username and password when they do this. And once that is created, it can be used every year, each year that they need to renew that FAFSA or that they need to go in and manage their student loans or just go in and see what kind of activity has been on their account. And parents, when they create their studentaid.gov account, they only need to create one. If they have siblings in college or if this student has a sibling, they only need their one signature. That parent signature is going to be the same because that represents them as a legal signature. You may need to refresh a username or password from one year to the next if you're not in a studentaid.gov account very often or at studentaid.gov. But it's an easy process that they will take you through. Also, if a parent is applying for college and they're doing their own FAFSA, they'll use their same signature for their own FAFSA. So when you look at your students, some may need just one studentaid.gov account and others may need more than one. Most dependent students will need at least one more. The student needs to open that account. And then if they are dependent, at least one parent will also need to sign. And I will show you how that is all decided as we go through this. Basically, the rule for married parents is pretty simple. If your parents, I say you because this whole PowerPoint is addressed to the student, but if they're married and they were married in 2024 to each other, and they married filing jointly, or they put married filing jointly on their tax return, that means there was only one tax return done, and so only one parent needs to open that new account at studentaid.gov. If they didn't file jointly in 2024, and there's 3 examples that you see here, such as married filing separately, not married but living together, or remarried since 2024, then likely that parent and a step parent will need to create each will create their own account because they would both need a signature. And I'll tell you why exactly we both need signatures here in just a second. If the parents are divorced or separated, the parent who gives the student the most financial support in the last 12 months leading up to this FAFSA will be the one to contribute their information. That's regardless of who the student lives with. It's the parent who provided the most financial support. Now, if that parent has remarried, then the parent and step-parent must be able to agree to contribute their information. There are two tax returns in this case. If they've remarried since 2024, the parent needs to sign to get their tax return transferred over, and the step-parent would also need to sign because they had a separate return in 2024. A new FAFSA tool is available to help you. You can take the students to this link before they ever start their FAFSA. It's always going to be inside the FAFSA. They'll go through these same steps. But if there's any question as to how many parents need to contribute, then they can go to this tool and go through the steps, and then that will help them decide who all needs to be on that FAFSA. Also, we have some resources here at our website that will help students and parents with this. One of them is the Who Needs a StudentAid.gov account. You'll see a flow chart here to take them through steps. Or if the student's not sure if they're going to be considered dependent, needing a parent's information, or independent, then there's also a resource for that to help them through those steps. Now it's time to create the studentaid.gov account for the student. And so they go in to studentaid.gov and choose create account. The banners that you see at studentaid.gov kind of switch out. So there won't always be a create an account button showing the second you log in there. It's circled here, but you can always find the create account button up in the top right corner over by the magnifying glass. It's always going to be there. You just have to look for it. Just some tips on creating those accounts and what is required. Please make sure that your students and parents use a personal email address. That is because, of course, students, once they've graduated from high school, they're not going to be able to get email at their school, and parents should use a personal one as well, not an employer's address. Please don't ever share your username and password with anyone, not even parents with their children or children with their parents. This is your legal signature and it needs to be protected. And don't ever include a birth date in a password. That's a good rule of thumb with anything that you're setting up a password for. You'll notice there's something circled here on this picture of this, the new account screen. There's a blue link that says, what if I don't have a social security number? Parents without social security numbers will go through a little bit different process when they create their accounts. And those of you who've been in this business for a couple of years will know that that hasn't been going too well the last 2 years. But we've been assured it will be smoother this time around. Most likely the parents will then go to some multiple choice TransUnion questions that they answer. And if they can verify their identity through that, then everything's good. It's possible they may need to send in some documentation, but we are crossing our fingers and hoping for a great year for that this year. If a student is homeless, we encourage them to borrow an address from either an adult relative or a friend who they are in contact with frequently, or they can ask the college's permission to use their address to receive their mail there. You always want to encourage that student to ask permission before they put anyone else's address. And if it is at a college specifically, they would need to know exactly how that should be addressed by mail, suite number or the name of the office, because colleges can be pretty big places. So we need to make sure it can get to them. Alrighty, as they're setting up the account, the students and parents will see these screens. One is to verify their email address, which is required. They must have an email address. And their cell phone's not required, but we strongly suggest it's used if that student has their own cell phone number. Remember that when parents and students are setting up their accounts, the student and the parent cannot share an email address. They have to have unique email addresses and they must have unique cell phones, cell phone numbers. So one thing we've been asked is, what if my parent and I share a cell phone? In that case, we strongly suggest that the student use the cell phone number on their account because it's going to be their FAFSA and they're the one who needs to get that information. Okay. There will be a code, a secure code sent to the email address, and the student will need to paste that code into their FAFSA application or their new account application that they're working on right here. And if they use a cell phone number, they will also get a text with a security code asking them to verify with that code. And when they get to the end of this process, the FAFSA will generate, the studentaid.gov account will generate a backup code. It looks like this, like a squirrel ran across the keyboard, but it's basically a one-time use code. And so if that student or parent goes in with their login information later and they just aren't able to access the account, this code can be used one time to access the account. If you ever needed to try it again with another code, you would need to call the federal student aid number, and it's listed here on the screen in the yellow box. All righty. Remember that the accounts should be verified immediately, and the Social Security office will send confirmation that it matched, and then you will be not having to wait a long time to get your FAFSA started. Remember that contributors, parents mostly, also need to create their own accounts, and their email addresses and their phone numbers cannot be associated with any other account but their own. It's a unique signature. All right, pausing. Any questions we need to address?
No, we're good right now.
Okay, well, you must be flying through those, Robbie. Thank you. All right, in order to complete the FAFSA, this is what they need to gather up. Students probably need to gather less than parents. You'll need the Social Security or permanent resident card, and 2024 tax returns or W-2s. We're always going to be applying, we're using the tax information from 2 years prior to the year that they're starting school. They'll be starting in fall of 26, and so they need the 2024 tax returns. Now, the students are going to need to know the current balance of their cash, savings, or checking accounts. So it's good to have that in advance. They're all put together in a total on the FAFSA. That's part of their assets. And the student is also going to have to know their parent's email address so they can invite that parent later on. Now, students will also answer questions about saving, investments and businesses and farms. Granted, most seniors in high school aren't going to have any of those, but they are required to report them if they do. Some general tips on filling out that FAFSA. You do not need to enter any punctuation except if there is punctuation on the student's social security card or permanent resident card. Those dashes, those apostrophes need to be added because it needs to match what Social Security has. Make sure to save the application frequently. There's going to be a save button on practically every screen you see in the FAFSA. And you want to use the previous and continue buttons that are shown more toward the bottom of each screen. Please don't use the browser button that's up in the top left corner of your device. If you hit that back button up there, it could kick you completely out of the FAFSA and they may have to start over again. So use the buttons provided. Once again, you go to the start the 2026-27 FAFSA form. Now, I'll point this out again later, but notice over to the right, there's also a button for accepting an invitation for that form. That's what a parent will click when they get their email. Student always needs to select a student role, and they're not going to see the parent questions. They'll see just their own. There are 4 onboarding videos. I'm not going to show them all to you, but I just want you to know that they're here. One of them explains what the FAFSA is all about, and who needs to contribute to the form in the second video. The third one is the one that I really point out to students when I'm out there, is that it explains that every contributor that's putting information on that FAFSA, they have to give consent and approval for the IRS to transfer their tax return data from their 2024 return to the FAFSA. It's a requirement now, and it has greatly shortened the time that it takes to process a FAFSA, and it has reduced errors significantly because everything is done electronically, and there aren't going to be a lot of things that need to be changed. If a parent well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but if someone does not want to authorize this transfer, then that will keep that student from getting very much financial aid at all. Then there's a fourth video explaining what happens after the FAFSA. We'll cover a little bit of that at the end. When a student or a parent logs into the FAFSA, they're going to see their identity information there on the screen. It's a good idea to look through everything they have on that and make sure that all is correct. Now, if you need to change your mailing address, it can be made directly on that screen, but otherwise, you want the students to go to their account settings at studentaid.gov to make any of those changes. I keep saying students, also the parents. This page shows that consent that everyone must give, and you'll notice in bold print it says provide consent and approval, or you won't be eligible for federal student aid. So it summarizes what they're going to do with that data, who's going to be sending it to federal student aid, and there are frequently asked questions. You can click on those and get information, and you'll notice previous and approve. The decline doesn't have a button around it, but just remember, if somebody declines to have that transfer done, that student is not going to qualify for much federal aid at all. There is one type of aid they may qualify for. So you definitely want to approve that consent form. Even if a student or parent did not file taxes in 2024, they still are required to click this approve button, and then the IRS can let the school know that they did not file taxes in 2024. Just remember that if you don't click approve, that student's not going to be eligible. There may be exceptions for very special or very unusual circumstances. It's not up to me to say what those circumstances are. It's going to be up to the financial aid people at the college to determine whether that student would be released from any of that. Okay, the student then starts to answer questions about their personal circumstances, and this is where the parental things come in with all of the questions about their parents' marital status, etc. But then they get into college and career school plans. One thing we always point out to the seniors that we talk to is that even if they have advanced placement credits or concurrent enrollment credits, they will still be classified as a first-year freshman. So I want to make sure you all have heard that. They may have AP credits and concurrent, but they did this before they were enrolled in college. So they were not a college student at that time, and therefore they're still a first-year freshman. There's going to be 8 different circumstances that a student will look at to see if any of these apply to them. Most dependent students or if they are dependent, none of these will apply to them at all. And if we were to scroll down on this screen, we could see that there is an option at the bottom, none of these apply, and they could click that. However, if one of these special circumstances is checked, such as a student is in a legal guardianship, which we see this a lot, one of those boxes being checked makes that student an independent student, and they would not have to have another contributor on the form unless they were married. We'll talk about homelessness one more time. There will be a question that will ask them anytime on or after July 1st, 2025. Of course, that's very recent, but we're talking about next year's FAFSA. If they've been homeless or they've been unaccompanied, if they've been unaccompanied and they've been homeless or at risk of being homeless, then they could answer this question, yes. And that would also change their status on the FAFSA. Other unusual circumstances are ones that were introduced in the last couple of years. Financial aid officers have always had the authority to look at these things and to change a student's dependency status if they feel that it's worthy of doing that. But if you can read the screen, it's very, very extreme circumstances, such as they left home due to an abusive or threatening environment, they were abandoned, they have a refugee or asylee status and are separated from their parents, they're a victim of human trafficking, they are incarcerated or their parents are incarcerated, and contact with the parents could pose a risk. And then even if a student is unable to locate their parents, they don't know where their parents are, they just cannot get in touch with them, then if one of these situations should apply, they would mark yes to that question, but we ordinarily see students marking no. If a student does say yes to that question, there's a new status that was introduced a couple of years ago, and it's called provisionally independent. If that student does have one of those extreme, unusual circumstances, the FAFSA will not ask for them to supply parental information, but the financial aid office at the college that that student is talking to about going to their school, they're going to require that the student provide documentation to basically prove or validate the claims that they're making. You as counselors can write letters, clergy that are involved with the family, social workers, all different kinds of people can provide documentation to help that student actually validate that status. And so it is still called provisionally independent because the deciding team that's going to figure out whether that student will then be called independent or dependent from now on, after they've gotten all this documentation in, it's up to the financial aid office at the school that they are wanting to get into. And it's not an appealable thing at this point. So basically the student will be given a very important deadline on when they have to have that documentation in, and then it will go from there. Do we have any question about the dependency status that's out there, Robbie?
No, nothing on that. I'll just say we did have a question earlier kind of related to it, that they had a student who I guess clicked no on this part about students or about parents refusing, and so it made the student independent. Um, but this is what I was talking about to that conversation I was having. This slide
Okay.
right here.
Okay, that if let me try, no, stutter. Uh, if there's a situation where some important question gives that student a different status, you have to go ahead and FAFSA, let that FAFSA process, the student gets their summary, and then they can call a financial aid office and tell them what happened and ask them how they need to handle the situation. But yeah, that can happen sometimes. Our students are, unlike me, they grew up with computers everywhere. And so they're very quick at doing a lot of this entry. And sometimes they skim through things and aren't really fully aware of what they're answering, yes or no. So that can happen. Um, in a,
We do
yes,
have one more in here.
sure.
We have Heather asked about a student is living with a grandparent because of the home environment. Are we considering that student homeless or not?
That's a very good question. First of all, I want to ask, let everybody know that it depends largely on whether that grandparent is a legal guardian or not. We have a lot of students living with legal guardians in Oklahoma. And so if that grandparent is a legal guardian, that student would answer yes to a question about them being in a legal guardianship, and that would automatically make that student independent, and therefore they wouldn't need any other contributors' information. Um, there are circumstances where you might want to ask a financial aid office what they can do for a student who's living with a grandparent because of home circumstances, but they're not a legal guardian. That may be another thing where they'll need to gather some information from people who know the family and are aware of what's going on. and present that to the college. This is called a professional judgment. If a student in every way looks like they're independent, or excuse me, dependent, but they feel they should be independent for some extreme reason, then that's when that person needs to appeal to the financial aid office with lots of documentation to back it up. I hope I answered
Mhm.
that sufficiently.
If they have more questions, they can follow up with this. We have a few more. We've got a lot coming
Oh,
in right
okay.
now. The
Okay.
next one is a student was in foster care for 6 years, now in a guardianship that expires when they graduate. So will that student be considered independent? Will they need any other contributor information?
If at the time they fill out the way the question is worded is, anytime since the age of 13, are you or have you been in a legal guardianship? And so obviously they have been since the age of 13. So they will answer that question with a yes, I have been. And that makes them independent. And they would not have to have any other contributors' information unless they're married. Then they would need their spouse.
The other one that I have here is a student recently became a father, still lives at home with their mom. Will that be a factor in, I guess, in the eligibility or in what financial aid they'll be eligible for?
If the student has a dependent child that they provide more than half of the financial support to, which can include food stamps, things, different public aid, if they are supporting that child more than half, at least 51%, that makes them an independent student, and they would then just just only report their own information. This is one of those things where a student have to really be honest, and they may be asked by a financial aid office to verify some of their information, but that would make them independent if they're providing support. If not, then a parent, a legal parent, birth parent or adoptive parent would need to report their information on the student's FAFSA.
The other one here is this is a hot topic for him. So,
Okay.
uh, a recent graduate that became estranged from parents just before they went to college, uh, can can they write a letter for the college to help with that homeless status?
Yes, they can. In fact, they may want to call first and ask, what's the first thing I need to do? Because different colleges have different ways of handling this. But eventually, yes, somebody will need documentation in order to do that. They've got to have a very valid reason, and they have to have it in the student file so they don't get dinged by federal student aid. And I can't make any guarantees or assurances because it is completely up to the financial aid office at that college as to whether or not they would override that dependency status and call them independent.
Next one, thank you, Lisa. Uh,
Mhm.
the student whose father just went to prison, living with their grandparents, who do not want to become the guardian. The father was the guardian until they went to prison. So is this student considered homeless? What is their status?
They, that's a good question. Not being a financial aid officer sitting there talking to them, I wouldn't be able to say exactly how this would end, but because he is in prison, um, I believe that they would use that unusual circumstances question and mark that one of those situations applies to them because the dad is incarcerated. Do we know anything about the mom, where the mom might be, or there's lots of different questions that a financial aid officer would ask. But basically, if there's not a parent out there who is a birth or biological parent who is giving that student support, then it's possible that could be changed to an independent student status. But that's all on the discretion of the financial aid office.
What about a senior that's married this year but was on their parents' taxes in 2024?
Good question. Um, the rules for dependency and reporting on the tax return and on the FAFSA are different. And so regardless of whether he was counted on their tax return in 2024, if he is currently married as he's filling out this FAFSA, he will enter that he's married, and that will make him an independent student. He will need to include his wife's income information from 2024 on the FAFSA. So it sounds likely that they're going to both need to create that account. I doubt that they filed taxes together in 2024, so they would both need to create an account.
I think now's your chance to move on if you want to. They're busy
Okay,
in here.
I pushed the button. Okay. Remember, to get federal aid, a student has to be either a U.S. citizen, a U.S. national, or an eligible non-citizen. We know them as the people with the green cards. Parents do not have to be U.S. citizens. There's not going to be anything that they're going to be concerned about on whether the parents are U.S. citizens. The parent does need to create that account though and submit their information to the FAFSA. Now, the next question is the one question that is going to be asking about the birth parents, the biological parents. Choose the highest level of education that your birth parents have. A lot of students aren't going to know about one or both of those parents, and so that they just answer this question the best way they know how. And then from here on, we're talking about the recent parent situation. If they have a parent who is killed in line of duty as a public service first responder or as in a military situation, any time after the events of 9/11, then they would mark this question yes. That would make them automatically qualified for the maximum amount of need-based aid that they can get. And so that includes the Pell Grant, which for this year and next year, it's $7,395. Remember, those grants are the free money that is gift aid. So that's one benefit or one positive thing that can come out of such a bad experience. Students need to say which high school they are graduating from. So of course, most of yours are going to say high school diploma. Homeschooled students can also mark that they're homeschooled. If they did graduate from a high school, they're going to need to enter that information from search for their school by city and state. And if for some reason there's a school that they just can't find, it won't pop up for them when they put that in, then they might check things like, did you enter it as, spell it out as high school, or maybe you just need to put HS because many of those high schools are listed with just HS rather than the full name. When it comes time for the students to put in their finances, remember they've already authorized the IRS to use their tax return. I don't know a lot of college or of high school sophomores when they worked in 2024 who filed taxes, but if they did, they need to make sure that's all been consented to. If they didn't file, then they're going to need their W-2s to be able to say how much income they earned in 2024. And many of them don't hang on to W-2s. And so if that's the case, they will have a chance to estimate their income. And they'll put in that manually into the FAFSA. Don't ever use decimals or cents. You only need to report whole dollars. All of the dollar fields start with a zero in them, but if you were to backspace and clear one out, just remember you've got to have a zero if a question doesn't apply to that student. The students can refer to their W-2s, or even before they do their FAFSA, they can estimate what their income was for 2024. This is the question I mentioned earlier. The student has to report their total of cash savings and checking accounts today, the day they're doing their FAFSA, not back in 2024. They also need to report investments, and including real estate, businesses and farms, and investment farms. Most students that I've worked with put zeros in those two fields, but that won't be uncommon for them to do that. Alrighty, it'll be time for the students to tell federal student aid where they want this information sent from their FAFSAs. They now have room for 20 different schools on the FAFSA. By putting a school code on, they're not making any commitments. They're simply giving federal student aid that permission to share data with these schools that they're interested in. They can use up to 20 codes, and there's a little green box that you see there that will help them keep track of how many different schools they can put on that FAFSA. They look it up by city and state, and then when they see the list of schools that come down, They pick the one they want and they tell the FAFSA to add that to the FAFSA. We want to make sure that any school a student has an interest in gets listed on that FAFSA, because it's a great way to compare colleges and see what they would be offered in financial aid at the various places. Even students in private schools, a lot of times there's more scholarship money, there's different resources to pull from. So even in the more expensive schools, sometimes that can even out the playing field and help them be more affordable. If by chance that student decides later, after they submit their FAFSA, that they need to add schools, they can go back in and edit the FAFSA at studentaid.gov and add those schools to the list. All right, it's about time for the student to be done. Now it's time to invite their parent. All they need to do is put in the parent's email address. That's it, nothing else. When we're all cheering about that. So we're very happy that that's going to be a much easier step for the students. And then they'll click the send invite button under the email address. Then the student can review their responses. Each of those white boxes you see has a little link that you can click on to drop down that section so they can check each one individually, or they can just click view all. And that's important that the student looks that over to make sure there's nothing amiss already that they need to correct. They're also going to see the status of their parents' invitation. It shows them the email address, the role as parent in this case. It'll show the invite code that's being sent in the email to the parent. And you'll notice that the status of this is that the invite has been sent. When it's time to sign, it's the sign part can sound a little confusing because they're not actually going to sign anything. They got in with their user ID and password. That is their signature. And so by logging in with that and by clicking that box, it's important that they click that box that says they agree to the terms. Then they click that button, sign student section. And they should see this. If they are dependent and they have a contributor that they've invited, it's going to say pending submission, and that they need to check with their contributor, and it gives that information again about who's the contributor and their invite code. We're not going to go through all the steps parents have to take. Remember, parents may have to give more information about investments. Small farms where the family resides are no longer considered an asset. That didn't last very long, so thankfully for that. Small businesses with under 100 employees also do not have to be reported as assets. But when this parent gets this email, they're going to accept the invitation. That button's a little bit covered up, but you see where that's checked. And then on farther down, you see the box that has that security code that the parent will need to access that student's FAFSA. The parent will log in to FAFSA.gov, and that's where they'll click that accept an invitation button to get them started on the form. When the parent is finished, they're the ones who get that final congratulations message that says the FAFSA form is complete. I kind of skipped over, but remember that parent's got to sign on as a parent and not the student. Because if they don't click parent, they're not going to see the questions that they're required to answer. Okay, any questions before we move on? I don't have a lot more to say.
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment. Okay. So this is what we can expect next after that FAFSA is filed. After it's gone through all the submission process and everything's verified, the student will receive instructions on retrieving their FAFSA submission summary. It's going to be a very important document that they need to look at very carefully. It's a good idea to print the page. You see that option up in the top right corner. Many scholarship agencies will want to see this summary, and so that's a good reason to print it out. Or even just if you're a grandma like me, you like paper. You want to be able to touch it and look it up. Okay. Another number that's going to appear on that is the data release number. You as counselors, the student really won't ever usually need this, but if there's a situation where a financial aid office needs to go in and alter some income numbers for whatever reason, they're going to ask the student for their DRN. That's just a 4-digit code, but a student should never give a financial aid office their username and password. If by any chance that financial aid office gets caught in an audit having that in their possession, that can really get them in trouble. So please don't ever try to give them that. Give them their DRN. And then you don't see the whole list below, but it is going to list the estimates of aid that this student should qualify for based on what they've reported. In this case, you see the federal Pell Grant circled. That's not the full amount because their financial need was not high enough to get the full amount. And this is how we know kind of about the financial need and how that's determined. Down farther on that page, there will be this box that says Your Student Aid Index, or SAI. For those of you who've been in the business a while, this used to be called the EFC, but it's basically the same principle. With the SAI, though, that number can be negative. It can go below 0. It can be anywhere from a minus 1,500 to 999, 999. And the basic rule of thumb is the lower your SAI is, the higher the financial need is. So the more aid you likely would qualify for. This student has a minus 355 EFC, which basically tells, excuse me, SAI, did it again. It basically tells the financial aid office that they had very low income, they and their family. And so anybody with a SAI of 0 or below, a negative number, is going to qualify for the full Pell Grant and probably most other types of need-based aid. All right, after the FAFSA is processed, after they get a summary, they may still have something that they want to appeal with the financial aid office. You have to report everything the way it happened in 2024. But if a family has a loss of income anytime since 2024 and their current income is smaller than it was then, and you can see reasons for this here listed with the bullets. It's possible that a financial aid office could adjust those figures for income on their FAFSA. Only the financial aid office can do that. A student would not be able to. And so they can discuss that with their financial aid office. They can tell them, this is my current circumstance. The financial aid office would likely ask for copies of pay stubs or something to show their current income. And if the financial aid office deems that it would be beneficial to the student to lower those amounts of income, they can go in and do what's called a professional judgment and change those figures. They have the authority to do that, but they've got to have documentation to back it up. And then if that SAI goes down enough that it would affect the amount of need-based aid they would receive, then that would definitely be to the student's benefit to appeal that. The student will then start getting financial aid offers from the colleges that they have sent the FAFSA to by putting their school name on there. This is just a sample offer. Not every offer is going to look like this, but they are all required to show what a year's worth of attendance will cost in their program. It's called the cost of attendance. They're required to show any money, any free and earned money that they're eligible for. Now, private scholarships are not going to be included on this award letter unless that student has already told financial aid about scholarships they're receiving, such as Oklahoma's Promise. And then last but not least, the student loans will be listed. These are the loans that the student would qualify for at that college if they choose to use them. Students can decline any aid that they are offered, and there's almost always going to be student loans on a financial aid offer unless it's at some technology centers don't use student loans. But remember that student can always decline that offer. They just need to make sure and do it before the deadline that's given to them on that award letter, financial aid offer. All right. Last but not least, we're going to check very quickly on different websites that we suggest for students to look up scholarships. Going back to this award letter, you'll see a green box at the bottom that says estimated outstanding costs not covered by all this aid. If that student has what we call a gap in their financial aid, they're encouraged to look for those scholarships. And the 4 websites that we have listed here are all ones that we strongly suggest. They have great information on them. OCCF is the Oklahoma City Community Foundation. Tulsa CF is the Tulsa Community Foundation. They both have scholarship programs for people in their areas that are excellent resources. Also, they can spend time on their search engine, look under brand names like, uh, well, Lowe's. I know that's a company, but Lowe's has a great scholarship program. Pizza Hut, Brahms does this Dr. Pepper thing every year. There's all kinds of things that you can apply for, just looking for, or maybe put in scholarships for disabilities or scholarships for wrestlers or scholarship for left-handed flute player, things like that. And there really is a scholarship, or was at least last time I checked, for left-handed flute players. So, alrighty. Local companies are also great, and the counselors, of course. We always tell students, ask your counselor. Counselors are famous for having those local scholarships that are less competitive. And so we always encourage students to check with you all to check and see what might be available. There are some resources we have at youcango2.org. Essay tips. Not every scholarship, of course, requires an essay, but a great many of them do. There's ways to plan out their scholarship search and advice to give on that. And then we have a scholarship tracker if they want to use that to keep track of which scholarships they've applied for and the deadline, all of the information that they need for that. Just an update, little update on Oklahoma's Promise. Remember that students have to apply for Oklahoma's Promise in the 8th, 9th, 10th, or 11th grade, or new this year, they can apply as seniors up until, or their last date that they can apply as a senior is December 31st of their senior year. And we're happy that is happening, but I'll just let you know that if that student sends in an incomplete application, if it's by the deadline, then the application is in, but there's going to be a very short turnaround from the time that they get that submission in and the time that they are approved for the scholarship. So it's very important that they be as thorough as they can with their applications. And Oklahoma's Promise will pay full undergraduate tuition at an Oklahoma public school, higher education institution. And some technical programs are also eligible to receive partial tuition from Oklahoma's Promise. Oklahoma's Promise doesn't cover those other expenses like fees, books, supplies, etc. So it's always important that they fill out that FAFSA. And as an Oklahoma's Promise student, they're required to fill out that FAFSA. So make sure that they get on board with that. And okpromise.org is the website if they have any questions. I also want to mention that teachers in Oklahoma, dependent students of teachers who are certified Oklahoma teachers and have been in the classroom for 10 or more years, are now eligible for an income provision, which means that student or teachers can make the teacher's family income can be significantly higher than the standard income that that student would ordinarily apply under. So go to okpromise.org and see about all of those new requirements for teachers. They're I just want everybody to know that I took my income, I put that in there, my family income, and my family would not have qualified for Oklahoma's Promise. But as a 10-year or more certified teacher in Oklahoma, under these guidelines, my family would have qualified for it. So I encourage you all to investigate that. All right, that ties up everything. Anything else we need to talk about, Robbie, from the chat?
This was asked a few times, so I wanted to make sure we addressed it
Okay.
this way instead of just in the chat. Will they be able to see these slides and watch this recording later?
Yes, it will. It is. Yes, let me turn and say, do we know about when that might be available?
Hopefully late next week.
Okay, we're hoping for late next week, and it should be posted at OKCS.
You can go.
You,
to
okay. You can go to .org will be where you can find it. Thank you. I should have asked that question before.
And of course, this is the presentation that a lot of us will do if we come out to the schools
Yes, sir.
to do these in person. So if you wanted to do that, we posted the link for that a few minutes ago, but I'll put it in again just to make sure that people have access to that link as well.
Great, thank you. And just so you'll know, we can tailor this to anyone's needs. If there's something you think we cover too much of, and or there's something we need to add for you, please let us know, and we can customize it for whatever you would like us to.
There are no other questions in the chat at the moment, so I guess you covered everything you could have ever possibly covered.
Okay, that sounds very good. All right, I want to thank everybody for being here. All of us on the outreach team really appreciate what you do every day for your students. Many of you are enrolled in College App Week. Perhaps you just finished it or you're going to be starting it soon. Thank you so much for all you do during that time. I know it's a lot of work, but it makes a big difference in those kids' lives. So thank you. Okay, I guess we'll be signing off. And once again, thank you all for being here. Bye-bye.